The stock market hit a record high this week. Let me say that again. An all-time high. And while the champagne was popping in lower Manhattan, a gallon of gas was closing in on $4.20 nationally. Food assistance for roughly 42 million Americans was cut by 14%, and the head of the International Energy Agency quietly warned reporters that Europe has roughly 6 weeks of jet fuel reserves left if oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz do not resume. 6 weeks. Two different realities. One country. Today, I'm walking you through 5 stories that, placed side by side, paint a picture cable news is too distracted to draw. A pope being mocked on social media, a former national security advisor calling the presidency a state of panic, a defense budget that just pulled $1.5 trillion from domestic programs, a supply chain warning Wall Street has not priced in yet, and one question that changes how you should think about your grocery store next month. Stay to the end, because the last story is the one your coworkers have not heard yet, and it lands closer to home than anything else I cover today. But first, the one that connects everything else. Think about what 3 headlines placed next to each other actually mean. The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq closed at fresh record highs. Markets are calling it Middle East hopes. One analyst speaking to Bloomberg described institutional investors as looking past the conflict, on the assumption Washington will negotiate a ceasefire within weeks. Netflix beat earnings, Alphabet beat, Meta beat, Wall Street is in a very good mood. Meanwhile, a gallon of regular gas is at $4.20 nationally. SNAP, the food assistance program that roughly 42 million Americans rely on, was cut by 14% this month. Medicaid waivers are being slow-rolled in half the states. Veteran disability claims are stacking up unprocessed, and the divergence between Wall Street and the grocery store is, again, the loudest story nobody on cable television wants to name. You know what the most interesting part is? Those two things are not a contradiction. They are the same story told from 2 different zip codes. Now here is where it gets even more important. The International Energy Agency warned this week that Europe is sitting on roughly 6 weeks of jet fuel reserves if oil does not resume flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. The agency's director called this potentially the worst energy crisis the world has ever seen. 20% of global oil volumes are already off the market. United States airlines are quietly repositioning aircraft to shorter routes. American liquefied natural gas exports to Europe jumped 14% in a single month. What does jet fuel have to do with your grocery bill? Everything. Jet fuel and diesel share a refinery chain. When diesel tightens, trucking costs climb. When trucking costs climb, grocery prices follow. Not someday, right now. If you found that connection useful, do me a favor and hit the like button. Not for vanity, because the YouTube algorithm only pushes this to more people if the first hour of viewers reacts. Subscribe if you have not already. Leave a comment telling me which city you are watching from and which of these stories worries you most. I read every comment in the first 48 hours and I reply personally to as many as I can. The next story is about the White House, the Pope, and a polling number that should alarm every campaign manager in both parties. Let me tell you what happened in Washington this week that, in any previous administration, would have dominated the news cycle for a full month. Donald Trump posted an AI-generated image of himself as Jesus Christ, robed in white, light radiating from his hands, laying a healing touch on a sick man surrounded by American flags and eagles. The same week, he published a lengthy statement calling the Pope weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy, mocking the Catholic Church's position on nuclear weapons and urban violence. His own conservative Catholic supporters called it blasphemy, publicly. Here is the political arithmetic. 70 million Americans identify as Catholic. They are not a monolith, but they are a reliable swing bloc, and they have decided close elections in the past. Pew Research surveyed them immediately after. Among white Catholics, approval of Trump slid from 51 to 46%. Job approval from 59 to 52. Trust in his ethical conduct dropped from 39 to 34%. Among Hispanic Catholics, that trust number went from 22% to 14%. What does that mean in practice? Not a switch, but a suppression. Catholics who are quietly disillusioned do not flip to the other party. they stay home in November. And in a country where presidential elections are decided by thousands of votes in 3 states, a few percentage points of reduced Catholic turnout is not a footnote, it is the margin. But this is where it gets more complicated. Because while the religious bloc was quietly recalculating, a former insider went on record. John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor before leaving under hostile circumstances, appeared on a major cable network this week. His assessment was precise and public. Trump is in a state of panic. He does not see an exit. He thought this would be simpler than it turned out to be. That is not a partisan attack. That is a man who sat in the Situation Room for months, describing what he observed firsthand. A separate behavioral analyst offered a clinical framing for the pattern, citing impulsive public statements against allied leaders, confident proclamations about diplomatic deals that remain entirely unsettled, and a pattern of behavioral escalation that grows more unpredictable under pressure. Whether or not that clinical frame fully applies, the political consequences are accumulating in plain sight. Allies are distancing, Catholic voters are recalculating, markets are pricing in uncertainty even as they celebrate record highs on the ticker. You see where this is going? An administration that started by projecting strength is now being described by its own former advisors as searching for an exit that does not exist yet. And here is the part that ties the whole thread together. The United States Senate failed this week to pass resolutions that would have forced the White House back to Congress before escalating the military presence in the Gulf. The deployment stays. The Joint Chiefs are quietly planning for an 18 to 24-month presence in the region, not weeks, nearly 2 years. The Defense Secretary's word, temporary, is running out of road. The approved budget path adds roughly $1.5 trillion to American defense spending over the coming decade. That is not an abstraction. That money has to come from somewhere. And it is coming from SNAP food assistance, from Medicaid waivers, from slower processing of veteran disability claims. Senators from both parties privately admit the administration is openly testing the limits of the War Powers Resolution, but publicly, not one of them gathered the votes to stop it. Honest question. When the same Congress that cannot afford SNAP increases finds $1.5 trillion for defense, what does that tell you about whose America is hitting record highs on the market? And so we arrive back where we started. A market at a record. Gas at $4.20, $1.5 trillion for defense, 14% cut to food assistance, a fuel supply chain warning from the people who track these things professionally. 2 countries, 1 market ticker. Look. Thank you for staying to the end. The fact that you watched through means you are taking this seriously, and that is exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. Subscribe because I am posting a follow-up specifically on the fuel supply chain and what it means for household budgets by summer. Hit the like because it helps the algorithm bring this to people who are not looking for it yet but should be. Share it with one friend who still thinks the economy is fine because the stock market is up. That friend needs this more than you do. If you can spare a super thanks, it goes directly into research time, cross-referencing sources, and keeping this channel free of any advertiser influence. A channel sponsorship helps keep this independent of any political party, hedge fund, or media group with no editorial conditions attached. Independent content means hours reading official documents, cross-referencing facts, finding the stories that nobody on cable has the incentive to tell. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 stories hit you the hardest today and where in the world you are watching from. I read everyone in the first 48 hours. See you tomorrow morning.